job interview is one of the most anxiety-provoking situations most people can find themselves in, even when they go to plan. But what happens when you have your worst interview ever? Our guests share their worst interviews ever in the hope that you will take something from their mistakes to have a more successful interview outcome. Some of the stories are horrific and some are just downright embarrassing. Let's join our host, Kevin O'Reilly, the interview skills coach with over 25 years experience in the fields of coaching and recruitment. Let's welcome our guests to the show.
Today we have on the show Darren Niven, the Regional Employer Engagement Director for the Reserve Forces and Cadets Association. He has over 20 years of operational experience in the corporate and hospitality sector, and he is a promoter of inclusivity and driving positive change within the workforce. Hi, Darren.
Hi, Kevin. Good to see you.
You too, sir. Thank you very much for coming on today.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks for having me along.
No problem. Where do we find you today, Darren?
Well, I'm home this afternoon, just after a day's working at home today for civil service. I've just finished up for today and getting ready to enjoy the weekend.
Oh, lovely, lovely. Do anything nice?
I'll just be out with the dogs on the beach. Lucky to live by the sea, so we'll be down to the beach trying to train a puppy. Trying to train a puppy at the minute, so we're struggling a bit with recall. So if you've got any techniques for that one, we might try and use some of them.
Do you know, it's probably easier rearing a child than trying to train a puppy to come back on recall.
Exactly. Treats, chicken, raw chicken seems to work. I don't think that's one for a child, but we'll try.
No, not chicken. What worked for us was cheese.
Very good.
Little cubes of cheese. That really worked for us.
Very good. Well, I have consulted a dog training expert, and it turns out we're bad parents. So yeah, it turns out there's a lot more similarities with interview skills, I think, than you realise.
That was brilliant, Darren. That's brilliant. Okay, Darren, before we get into what we're here to do, talk about today, tell our listeners something that not very many people know about you.
Well, I think for me, Kevin, a lot of people just assume that I'm from Northern Ireland, or maybe the accent doesn't quite sound like that. But I've been here for just over around about 22 years now, and I originally said that I would come to Northern Ireland for a job when I was asked to come from a previous employer. I said, yeah, no problem. I'll come for about a year, maybe two, and that was about, like I said, 22 years ago. So I'm still here. So there must be something all right about it.
That is that's a queer miscalculation.
Yes, just a bit.
So what has actually kept you here then, Darren?
Right, well, obviously I have to say my husband, and that's the first thing that it has to be said. But really, my career brought me here in the first place. I was working for an employer who asked me to come and run one of their sort of pubs and restaurants in Northern Ireland. I came here to do that. At the time, it was probably one of our sort of least well-performing units. And in the end, I really enjoyed it. I got to enjoy meeting the people here. I moved around quite a bit, started off up in Derry, Londonderry, moved around to Belfast, and eventually at one point I was covering from Derry right down to Cork as part of my region. So I got a lot of variety, met lots of different people, and got to see lots of different parts of Northern Ireland as the years went on.
Wow, that's quite a landmass to cover.
Yes, it certainly was, yeah.
I'm sure you were never at home.
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's probably away, it's up 2-3 nights a week, quite a bit of traveling in the car as well, which was great at the time. But, when you stop doing it, you sometimes kind of realize that maybe that's, not quite ready to do that again. So the role I've ended up at the minute has me at home a lot more. So it's worked out fantastic.
Lovely. Well, actually, since we've started discussing it already, take us a little bit back to where this journey started from where you are today.
I joined Wetherspoons back when I was just coming up to my 19th birthday. Prior to doing that, leaving school, I'd worked in a few bars around Glasgow. Even at one point, I was a DJ in a nightclub in Glasgow as well. So it was certainly all going on then. But I joined Wetherspoons as their shift manager in their sort of training manager program. About 25, 22 years ago. In that time, I started working as a shift manager in Glasgow, working in the different pubs across Glasgow. Went through the training program, and I had the opportunity to become a pub manager. At that time, I would have been the youngest pub manager in the company's history, just coming up for my 21st birthday. And at that point, that's when they asked me to move to Derry to run the pub up there. I'd never been to Northern Ireland before in my life. But I said, yeah, why not? Absolutely. I was young. I had the opportunity to run a pub, which was, fantastic. At that point, anybody who was going through the sort of career of becoming a pub manager would normally have to go and work in one of the sort of smaller towns in Scotland or out, away from a city centre. So to get the opportunity to come and run a big, high-profile pub in Northern Ireland was fantastic. Mum and dad actually packed the car up with all my sort of worldly belongings. It came to Northern Ireland to run that first pub. We had a flat in the pub as well, so it was fantastic. And really over that sort of first couple of years, really sort of developed my career, learned my skills, learned about people management, learned about marketing, as well as all the sort of food hygiene and the other elements that went along with running a good pub for Wetherspoons, one of sort of Britain's top employers, and has been for a number of years. I then had the opportunity to become an area manager. I went on what was called an area manager assessment day for Wetherspoons, which again, about 20 years ago, was probably slightly different than an assessment day would be now. One of the early tasks I can remember was something, akin to building a bridge out of toilet roll and toilet sort of paper tubes for a sort of team building exercise. I also very nearly went to that interview with blue hair as well, but I can tell you about that one a bit later if you want. But anyway, became an area manager, and that's when my career really took off. I was really excited to look after all our pubs in Northern Ireland, travelling around all of Northern Ireland. We had 9 pubs at that point, all over. And that took my journey. We moved to Belfast at that point as well, so I was in the centre of my area. That progressed for quite a few years, up until 2016, when we started opening pubs in Republic of Ireland as well. How exciting to open the first international pubs for Wetherspoons. We opened in Dublin, we opened in Cork, as well as sort of Greater Dublin as well, culminating in opening our biggest hotel biggest hotel and pub in the company's history, 90 bedrooms in Camden Street in Dublin, which was a fantastic opportunity. Things finished up really about a year ago. I had the opportunity to take some voluntary redundancy, which was quite a big challenge for me really to think about. I had an opportunity to really think about my life and what I'd wanted to do. But like a lot of people, we'd had that period, really difficult period during COVID, where I spent a lot of time at home, and it really was probably the most challenging sort of number of years that I had in my career, just in terms of trying to keep the show on the road and keep everybody motivated through what was a really difficult period, especially in Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, where we had sort of tightest restrictions on trading really across sort of Europe for a long period of time. That was a real challenge. Took the opportunity to sort of take some voluntary redundancy, and that's when I had to start looking at a different career option, and that's where we sort of ended up where we are now.
Tell us a little bit about that, like career
So-
options.
so
I would
career-
assume that wasn't the first, where you are right now wasn't the first place that you had went to. There was potentially others.
No, absolutely not. So when I finished up at Wetherspoons, the area manager roles in that kind of, sort of hospitality operations, there's not that many of them in Northern Ireland. There's not a huge amount of sort of branded operators that, as there would be over in GB in terms of sort of pub chains or, sort of casual dining chains. There are some, but not as many. So, there was a number of opportunities. I hadn't looked for a job in about 20 years. I had really enjoyed my career at Wetherspoons, so I hadn't really seriously looked for a job. I'd applied for a job once during my time, sort of the last few years at Wetherspoons, just out of interest, because another operator was coming to Northern Ireland, and I thought I would apply for it. And the first bit of feedback that I got was that I'd been in the company for too long. I'd been at Wetherspoons for too long, and really, that's not something that was attractive to an employer. So that really got me thinking. When I had the opportunity for redundancy, I was sort of just turned 40. Do I have the opportunity to change now, while I have the chance and have the financial security of the redundancy behind me, or do I sort of stick it out and try something else? So that's why I took the opportunity to try something else and started looking around. I had some colleagues who had taken some redundancy packages in previous years, and left and gone on to do different things. Some of which had gone on to work in public sector roles and really sort of said that they thought I would really enjoy it, and really blend in, particularly in some of the work I've been doing with in Wetherspoons, on employer support, employee support, and on inclusivity. So had started to have a look at some roles like that, but I had certainly a number of interviews which didn't go so well, which is probably why we're here today.
We are, and we will get to that. We will get to that very shortly. I just want to ask a question just with regards to you coming out of this environment that you've been in for 20 years, not having any experience except being on the other side of that table, conducting the recruitment, conducting those interviews. And when you went for your first interview, how was that? How did you feel when you were going for that?
Absolutely terrible. It's quite. I can't remember the sort of the logistics of sort of how I went for. I went through a spell of applying for lots of jobs. I had some garden leave, so I wasn't actually able to take another post up straight away. But I decided quite early on I was going to go for lots of interviews in that period to see, to sort of start practicing really, and building my interview skills back up. And what really set me back was when I didn't get offered any of those roles. I was really offended, and sort of thought, hang on a minute, I'm only applying for these roles for practice and for fun. So for you to not even, I'm far too good for these roles. So the fact that you haven't offered me them is really offensive. And but then it then put me in a real sort of downer as well, because I thought,
Yeah.
well, hang on a minute, I've taken this leap of faith, and now I can't even get some jobs that I think I should be able to walk into. So that was a real challenge, and that really knocked me sideways, to be honest.
Yeah. And I suppose that feedback of having too much experience is potentially what one of the employers had said to you, because you were in the organization for 20 plus years. You had
Yep.
too much of that one. What did they mean by that?
Well, I think that employer really, I can't really think about that one. But if I went to another interview, another interview, which we'll talk about when we get to my experience of an interview. But one of the questions that somebody asked me was, "Are you institutionalized? Have you been there for so long that you're institutionalized, and you can't change, and you can't manage change?" And that's something which I really had to learn about for future interviews.
Yeah, and that is, in my experience, what a lot of these employers are potentially thinking. I would sit on quite a few panels and on behalf of businesses, but alongside businesses as well. And that conversation has been had.
Yeah,
Vice
and I
versa.
think one of the things that I have now learned how to hopefully manage that question, and use it to my advantage. But at the time, and certainly initially, um, it caused me quite a lot of problems.
Yeah, it's a little bit short-sighted from sort of their end. You're almost like a pre-packaged, ready to run, which most organizations want. Hitting the ground running is the term that's used quite often. You could potentially have all of those skills, both hard and soft skills, in the bag, ready to go. There could also be a little bit of, he's not going to be around here for too long. He has so much experience that
Yep.
if he gets in here, he'll stay for 6 months and then he'll find somewhere else. And again, that conversation has been had many's a day behind the closed doors.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that comes across sometimes, and that can be quite clear from the panel sort of view.
Yeah, it is. And it's difficult to change that mindset once they're in that mindset. It's very difficult. And we've tried, talking about cognitive bias and understanding where our biases lie, trying to put something in place so that doesn't happen. But unfortunately, it's almost like it's automatic. They keep reverting back to their old ways.
No, absolutely. And then when I look at the role that I've come into now, that was a different role, quite a different role. But the experience that I've had, that those 21 years experience I've had, has really come into to play really quickly. I've been able to adapt those skills and change them into a role that I had absolutely no idea, that I initially did not think was something that would be for me. So, I think for an employer, when they're looking at somebody with that level of experience, don't just think about the role that they've done, but the life skills and life experience they have from that organization, especially if it's an organization that has a really good reputation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have spoke before, and knowing you as a person and your background and your experiences and your skills, I think that first employer missed somebody very special because it could have made a huge difference to their organization. Their loss.
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. But, and of course, everybody sort of told me as you go along, these things happen for a reason, and I've kept an eye on that employer, and I sometimes think what would, what would be and what would have came. But look, I'm absolutely delighted with the role that I've ended up with. And like I said, it's not one that I would have looked at initially. So, it's worked out, and hopefully it'll continue to work out for the best.
Well, listen, tell us a little bit about that actually.
So the role I'm in at the minute is working for the Reserve Forces. Well, it's managed by the Reserve Forces and Cadets Association of Northern Ireland, and it's a sort of subset of the Ministry of Defence. And really, my role is to act as a liaison between the employers of reservists and the Ministry of Defence. So it's quite an interesting role. It's an employer engagement director, and it sort of covers a couple of strands. Really, the first strand, which is almost a bit of a marketing role in a way, which is at first I thought, well, actually, a traditional marketing role is not something that I think I'd be comfortable with. But when I look at the sort of skills I had at Wetherspoons, of course, it was a huge marketing role in that. But part of the role is looking after the Armed Forces Covenant, and that's encouraging organisations, in Northern Ireland to sign up for the Armed Forces Covenant and the benefits that can bring to sort of reservists that they'll have employed by them. The other part is we look after reservists employers. Reservists obviously have a huge lot of skills which they can bring to their employers, which is fantastic. But for an employer, and particularly in Northern Ireland, where employing reservists for some organisations may not be very comfortable, or may not be something they've got a lot of experience with, there's quite a lot of opportunities for financial support when if that reservist is ever deployed or mobilised. But there's also a lot of things that the reservist has to commit to, so time off to attend training courses and camps and things like that. And I would act as that kind of liaison. So sometimes that's resolving problems. So a reservist may have problems with an employer, and I can sometimes speak to the employer and act as a sort of bridge between the two. And what I have found is that coming from an employer's background, that's been really, really helpful because I know sort of I've been an employer when I've had somebody come to me and say, because they didn't want to talk about being a reservist, and said that they were being deployed for a period of time, and I didn't know that. So now I have that experience of being able to deal with that and helping employers through. So that's a part of it. And the sort of third part, sort of, I suppose you'd say that the nice part of it, they're all nice parts, but the nicer part is engagement, and that's engaging with employers across Northern Ireland to help to see how they can support the sort of MOD with their sort of aims and goals as well.
And do you think, without mentioning any names or brands or anything, but do you think that there's still some organizations out there that have that viewpoint on we are not employing reservists?
No, the organisations may not know because it's really, people don't have to tell their employer they're a reservist. What we're trying to encourage people to do is if they feel comfortable is to tell an employer that they're a reservist, because it means that we can then support them and help them as well. So that's really that element of it.
And that really ties into what you're about as well, isn't it? That inclusivity and that empowering people to just talk up.
Absolutely, absolutely. In my last sort of few years at Wetherspoons, we started to roll out our network groups, whether it was the Women's Network, the Menopause Network, or the LGBTQ plus network, where I was the head office sponsor, also an Armed Forces network as well, which actually gave me the experience to talk about and interview for this role at the minute. A big element of that was being able to talk about that role that I had as a head office sponsor, encouraging inclusivity at my previous workplace, which was just fantastic. Because really, if we could just respect people, we just get so much more out of them in terms of performance at work and working environment. It's just productivity. Everything is just so much better.
Yeah, I suppose it's that unknown, almost that fear factor around not knowing how to approach it, not knowing what you can and cannot say, potentially makes people a little uncomfortable and a little awkward. So is it about educating and awareness more so than anything else? Or is there something specifically that you think this is a must, this has to be done for people to really understand?
It's education, it's awareness, and it's just giving people the confidence to speak to people and say, look, what issues you're having, or what issues do you have? Can you tell me about them? And let's see how we can make it better.
Yeah. In an ideal world, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? That everybody just spoke with respect to each other, treated each other like human beings instead of a particular subset of group, and just get on with going to work, doing what you enjoy, and going home and doing what you enjoy there.
People who are in an organization more than likely have so much more in common. They're in an organization for a reason. They usually want to be there for it doesn't matter if you're working in a shop, if you're working in an office, if you're working in as I am, and for the reserve forces, your aim is usually aligned. So that's the bit that you'll have in common, and that's the part you should work together on.
Yeah. You must have some great experiences where you are right now. I mean, just seeing some of the pictures that I see on LinkedIn and online, they look just amazing. Big events and big days, and it just looks very different than what you probably expect.
It is absolutely, it's not what I was expecting. We're first of all, the first part is, first of all, I work in an office essentially for some part of the week. Now,
Mm.
for somebody who is field based, now I do a lot of field based work, but initially just moving into an office environment after 20 years, first of all, was quite unusual. And the sort of etiquette of how that works was in a sort of a whole new world to me to start with. But then when I do get out about, which is still quite often, it's great. I've been to some sort of out to some really exciting places and out to see what's going on. So yeah, it's some great, some fantastic events. Was quite lucky to get to go to sort of Royal Gun Salute at Hillsborough Castle for the Queen's birthday recently, which was quite something. So yeah.
Wow. It's just not an ordinary job. It's quite a unique job. Any regrets given in that notice in Witherspoons and taking that redundancy?
Hmm. That's a really difficult question, because I think when you're so comfortable somewhere, you've been somewhere for so long, and it is really, the job and the people inside out and back to front. No, I don't think I have any regrets. I still dream about it sometimes at night. My body still sometimes have dreams about doing my old job, which I think is when you give anything up or you change anything, after such a long period of time, your body and your brain is just trained to do it so much.
Was it a dream or a nightmare?
No, it's usually a dream. It's usually quite a nice dream. But do you know what? I'm still in contact with so many people across the world, actually. From that job that I've done for so long. People that have moved around the world, and I'm still in contact with so many of them. So even when we move on, the core people are still in touch. So that's probably good. That's fine. That's absolutely
Yeah.
fine.
And I think that's true for most organizations. It's the people that really make it, isn't it? And
Absolutely.
it's getting those right people in. That's always the challenge for employers. Always the challenge for employers.
I think, I go back to my previous role, and I was there for, like I said, 20 years. as an organization, we went on a journey in terms of people. We learned over the years that the better we treated our employees, the happier they were. Just everything else sort of fell into place.
Mhm.
So and that's something that I've really tried to take with me in my new role, but also any interview that I've gone for. If I just think that people and how we manage people is just the most important part of our role.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it is the people that is the business. You can have the best service and the best product, but if you don't have the best people, then the business won't survive. There's businesses out there that treat their staff not very well and don't treat them with respect. And those businesses might initially make plenty of money, but they're gonna fold eventually. We've seen it time and time again.
Treating your employees like a commodity. Oh, well, just get rid of them, get another one. Get rid of them, get another one. We spent a lot of time at my previous role working out just how much that costs.
Mhm.
And when you add up every employee that you're turning over, it's just it just doesn't make sense. The managers of the future got to be your sort of shining stars that you get in early doors.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to get them people in, and you need to build them up, and that's how you keep the money in the business. You're not putting that money out there to recruit and recruit and recruit. It's ridiculous, the recruitment charges. It's the stuff that you don't see.
Yeah.
It's the stuff that you
And
don't see.
the training time, the time to train them, the time that the person has to spend sort of with them, and also just if you're panic recruiting, then the sort of amount of time you're not operating at full
Mhm.
strength as well.
Yeah.
If you look back to that period after COVID when in hospitality we were reopening across Northern Ireland wasn't as difficult, but when we reopened in central Dublin, for example, really, really difficult. A lot of people who had maybe who were from abroad had possibly gone home during that COVID period or left the country, and it was just jobs. Everybody was recruiting, and it was a really real difficult period, and hopefully we won't go through something similar to that again. I know sort of the economy can go through periods like that, but that was probably the most difficult period I can remember in terms of recruiting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think everybody has had challenges around that particular period and since then as well. I think the landscape has completely changed. And even how we look for people now needs to change. It needs to almost be updated because we're doing the same recruitment process and expecting a different result, and that's not going to happen. It just won't work. Won't work at all.
Mm,
But this leads us really nicely on to discussing your reason for being here today, and
mm.
that's about your worst job interview ever. So, Darren, over to you, sir.
So I mean, one of the roles that I went for early on in my period of after leaving my last role, really sort of got my attention. It was essentially the role I had been doing. I think it was a slightly more senior title, but it was the role for me. It was, head of operations role in hospitality, and that was it. So that was the job for me. I thought great. I've been for a few sort of interviews. They weren't really serious interviews. I was practicing and what have you. This role's for me. I'm going to go for it. I had a couple of Zoom interviews,
Mhm.
which were really positive. I felt they'd gone really well. Um, I prepared, I prepared for the interview like I was doing the job. I didn't prepare for an interview. I prepared for the job. So I
Yeah.
went out, in my old role, visiting our stores, our pubs, our restaurants, or you want to call them, visiting them and, looking at the operation was the biggest part of the role. So I went and visited every one of these, stores that these people had. I looked at different times of days, wrote a, sort of, operational plan, what could be improved, all these kind of things. and thought, right, that this is it. That this is easy. I can do this. Stand on my head. This is a role for me. And I got to the interview, and it was an absolute disaster. I arrived nice and early as I do. I'm an early arriver, and the interview was in a sort of business center, one of these business centers, and there was a glass, sort of glass offices in the middle. So the panel had there was quite a large panel. I think there was probably four on the panel, which I thought was fairly, quite large. But as part of my sort of planning for it, and a little bit of planning for the interview, I sort of said, right, what's each person's role? So I looked at each person's role, and I tried to sort of decide, right, when it comes to any questions, I'm going to ask each of those person, a specific question that relates to their role. So I'm going to ask the HR person something about the HR bit. I'm going to ask that didn't work because when we got to that bit, I'd forgotten who was who. I tried to write down where they were sitting at the table, but all that kind of stuff, that went out the window. But we went into the room and we sat down, and it was quite, really simple technique that I always remembered from, this is going back to when I was a pub manager, so 20 years ago. Don't make your interviews really intimidating. Don't sit at a table if you can avoid it where you're all sort of facing each other. Try and get the best out of people by making it a bit more relaxed. Well, this was a boardroom table, quite a small room, 4 or 5 of them sitting round the table, and me at the end. So we sat down, and bearing in mind the experience I'd had previously, I thought, right, here we go. And the first question was, you've been at Wetherspoons for 21 years. Don't you just think you're institutionalized?
Oof.
And I just went, and I completely dried up and couldn't think of an answer. I sort of stumbled through an answer that said, well, kind of, sort of, but we're a great organization that had really good systems in place. So after visiting your stores, I can see that you don't. And, I will be able to bring these systems and operations into your role, and, and make it better. And, it never really recovered from there on. It kind of did. I thought it got a bit better. We got a bit more chatty, as it went on, but it just, completely dried up. And as we got through the interview, it was quite a long interview. And as we were leaving, I caught, you cling on to sort of things, somebody asks you how it went, you look for the good bits. So first of all, you tell everybody it was terrible. And, then somebody says, well, how did it go? And then your friends will tease it out of you a little bit more. And somebody might say, well, oh, yeah, it wasn't as bad as you think. One of the interviewers said to me at the end, you haven't done many interviews, have you? And at that point, I thought, yeah, okay. So that was the end of it, really.
Oh dear, it wasn't a great question to start with.
No.
I would like to add, because I was putting you right on the back foot. That is quite an aggressive questioning method right off the bat, and recovering from that, I think you've done rather well just to stay in the room initially and continue. Now, okay, the comment, and I think you've admitted that comment yourself, is potentially viable, and yeah, you didn't have much practice.
Yeah.
But you potentially had done a million interviews from the other side of that table.
Absolutely.
But it's when that pressure is ramped up and those eyes are on you, it is very, very different. It is almost as if they're judging and looking into your soul.
Never again will I tell a candidate when they come in for an interview that just relax, don't worry about it. It's just a chat. That's the conversation we always use as an interview. We always say, just relax, don't worry. This is going to be, really painless. It does not work. That opening line doesn't work. I've now decided. So, we need to think of something else to say to candidates when they arrive. But that was my experience of it. It didn't work for me. And that's, doing a few more interviews like that, and coming across structure of questions was how I ended up sort of coming to look for some help with that.
You didn't get that job that you went for, did you? That very first one?
No, I did not. No, I did
I
not.
just wanted to be sure.
No, absolutely not. No,
Well,
absolutely.
Darren, if you were to go back, okay, let's say we go back to little Darren 20 years ago, knowing what you know now, what one thing would you tell Darren about interviews that he must do, and one thing that he mustn't do?
I think, structure your answer. That for me has been an absolute, game changer. Even as an interviewer, I don't think I look for structured answers. But since sort of some of the work we've done with you, giving a sort of start, a middle, and an end, and linking it back to the question, just has been transformational. It's given me confidence in how I answer the questions, and stops me from rambling, I think, is the biggest thing.
Yeah. And what's the one thing you would recommend they don't do ever with regards to an interview?
Don't dye your hair blue the week before the interview. So going for my area manager interview at Wetherspoons, sort of 22-year-old Darren had been somewhere, had gone to something that decided that blue hair was a good one. So the night before the interview, going to Tesco to get black just for men, and sort of washing your hair in the sink before going to the interview is probably a good one to go for.
Do you know what? I think that might go into the to-do pile as opposed to the not to-do pile. Don't dye your hair blue.
Yeah.
Just on the off chance that you might have that important interview coming up the week after. But if you do, you can change it back again to black. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant, Darren. Darren, thank you very much for that. And I think those takeaways that you've given will be very, very useful to all of the listeners. As I know it's been useful for me as well. Listening to someone that's been through those absolutely horrendous, worst interviews ever. And understanding that it takes a little bit of time and a little bit of practice just to get the cobwebs off again. And you almost have to feel that uncomfortableness in one or two interviews to really understand what you need to do and how you go forward. And structuring your answers, yes, I couldn't agree more. It doesn't matter what type of question you're asked. Without a structure to your answers, you tend to, when under pressure, ramble on, go off on a tangent, go off in a different direction. And many's the time whenever I've asked the candidate, what was the question I originally asked you? They actually can't remember. Because of that panic and that nervous situation that they find themselves in, I think it's different when you're put in that position and you realize what a candidate is going through. You have a little bit more respect for them when they walk in that door, and the interview goes slightly different. So I think everybody should go for interviews, especially if they're on an interview panel, because they'll know exactly how it feels to be sitting on that other side of the table. So Darren, genuinely thank you very much for that today. It was a real eye-opener. Loved everything you'd said, and I know my listeners will take so much away from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
And yourself, sir, and yourself. Look out for our next episode, where we will hear more stories and tales from behind the interview curtain. But until then, remember that on the other side of a successful interview is the life you all deserve.
For more details about our guest, or if you would like to be a guest, go to www.interviewskillscoach.co.uk/myworstinterviewever, or find us on Facebook or LinkedIn. And remember, on the other side of a successful interview is the life you deserve.